The drizzle had softened to a gentle mist, leaving the pavement glistening under the fading city lights. Riley Morgan pulled her worn coat closer around her slim frame, the damp air clinging to her hair and seeping into her sleeves. In one hand, she gripped a resume, creased at the corners, smudged by the rain, and barely holding together after being folded and unfolded too many times. It was more than paper to her, it was possibility. Her stomach churned with hunger, an all too familiar companion lately. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Pausing at a crosswalk, she checked her wallet, $4.16. It would be just enough for a cheap coffee, or maybe her bus ride back home. Not both. Just before the deli on the corner, she spotted a man who had clearly taken a bad fall. His grocery bag had split open, scattering a sandwich and a soda into a shallow puddle. No one around stopped to help, they simply stepped around him, their umbrellas shielding them not just from rain but also from compassion. Without hesitating, Riley approached, kneeling beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. The man, about middle-aged, soaked and visibly embarrassed, nodded with a wince. "Only my pride's hurt, I think." She helped him to his feet, steadying his arm. He looked down at the destroyed lunch with a rueful smile. "Looks like I'm going hungry today," he joked, trying to mask the discomfort. Riley didn't say anything. She simply turned and walked into the deli. A few minutes later, she returned with a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water, handing them to him without a word. He looked at her in stunned disbelief. "Miss, I can't take this." "You don't have to. But you look like you need it more than I do," she replied, her smile small but sincere. "Why?" he asked softly. "You don't even know me." She shrugged, voice low. "Because I've been where you are. I know what it's like to be down." She turned to leave before he could ask anything more. "What's your name?" he called after her. "Riley," she said without looking back. He watched her vanish into the crowd, her figure disappearing with the rain. By the time Riley arrived at the towering glass building of Vale Corp, her stomach was growling louder than ever. Her boots squished slightly as she stepped inside. The lobby was clean and warm, a stark contrast to the chill outside. She introduced herself at the front desk and was directed to the 22nd floor. As she stepped into the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished metal. Wet hair, tired eyes, and the ever-present resume clutched to her chest like armor. She took a breath and whispered to herself, "Just one more chance." On the 22nd floor, she was shown to a waiting area where other applicants, all dressed sharply, scrolled through phones or reviewed pristine portfolios. She felt painfully out of place. But behind a pane of tinted glass, a man watched her quietly. Ethan Vale, CEO of Vale Corp, stood motionless, his eyes narrowing with recognition. It was her, the woman who had given him her last sandwich. His attire had changed since then, now a sleek suit rather than the weathered flannel from earlier, but he hadn't forgotten her face. When Riley was called in, she was composed, steady. The interview began with typical questions, her certifications, work ethic, adaptability. She answered with clarity and honesty. Then came the shift. One interviewer leaned forward. "We ran a background check. It shows a conviction." Riley's chest tightened, but her voice remained level. "Yes," she replied, "financial fraud. I served 2 years." She explained the painful truth. At 24, she had been naive, in love, and trusting the wrong person. Her boyfriend at the time used her access as a junior accountant to siphon money. When it unraveled, he disappeared, leaving her to take the fall. "I didn't understand the documents I signed," she said. "I had no money for a proper lawyer. I couldn't prove my innocence." Silence filled the room, but she went on. She had spent her time in prison learning, earning certifications, teaching coding to kids after release. "I've worked every job that would take me. I've stayed clean. I've worked hard. I don't want pity. I just want a chance to show I'm more than one mistake." Her words hung in the air, raw and real. Ethan watched all of it from behind the glass. She hadn't spun a story. She had owned it. When Riley left the room, she knew the outcome. They'd said the polite words, "We'll be in touch," but she'd heard the doubt in their tone. She stood outside the building, rain misting down again, her coat clinging to her skin, her stomach still empty. Ethan stood in his office, silent. He pressed a button on his intercom, "Hold her file." Later that night, he had the entire background reviewed, court records, public defender notes, everything. What he uncovered disturbed him. The man responsible, Shah Ramsey, had a history of fraud allegations. Riley's name had been the only one tied to signatures. No defense, no follow-up. She had been left to carry the weight of it all. He picked up the phone. "Dad," he asked quietly, "got a minute?" His father, a retired businessman, responded warmly. Ethan shared Riley's story. When he finished, his father said, "Then it's time you decide what kind of leader you want to be." The next morning, the hiring committee was called to an emergency meeting. Tension thickened the room. Some were hesitant. "We can't ignore the conviction," one said. "Reputation matters," another added. Then Ethan entered, silent, sleeves rolled up, no theatrics. He walked to the center of the table and placed something down, the empty sandwich box from 2 days ago. "Before we decide," he said quietly, "let me tell you who Riley really is." He recounted their encounter in the rain. How she didn't know who he was. How she gave her last dollars to feed a stranger. She didn't ask for anything. She just helped, he said. She carried her past in that interview like armor, not excuse. "But what about our image?" someone asked. Ethan replied, "We define what our image is. Do we want to be a company that judges people only by their past? Or one that gives room to those who've risen from it?" He announced the launch of the Second Chance Initiative, a policy built to consider not just past records but redemption. "Riley Morgan will be our first hire. But not our last." On Monday, Riley walked into Vale Corp with a badge clipped to her coat. Her first day wasn't easy. There were stares, whispers, silent judgments. But she kept her head down and did the work. That afternoon, a small package arrived. Inside was a leather notebook. On the cover, it read, "From fall to flight." No name, just a note. "Every comeback starts with someone who keeps walking. Welcome to your flight." Slowly, the whispers softened. She was invited to a mentorship lunch, where she met other employees. Ethan was there, too, quietly in the back. Later, an email came from Monica in HR, inviting her to speak at a session on resilience. Riley almost declined, but Ethan left a folded note at her desk, his own handwriting, "Your voice is louder than your past. Use it." The day of the session, Riley stood in front of dozens of employees. No slides, no notes. Just truth. "There was a time," she said, "when all people saw in me was ex-convict. But no one asked who I was before, or who I became after." She didn't beg. She shared. She didn't boast. She offered a mirror. "I'm not here because someone rescued me," she finished. "I'm here because someone believed I was more than my worst moment." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was powerful. Employees lined up to thank her. Some cried. Most nodded silently with understanding. Ethan stood quietly in the back, watching. He didn't need to step forward. He had already given her the floor. Weeks later, one evening close to midnight, Riley sat at her desk alone, preparing to present a major proposal the next morning. Her eyes were heavy. Just a 5-minute rest, she thought, placing her head on her arms. Down the hall, Ethan returned to retrieve something he'd forgotten. When he saw the light still on and Riley asleep at her desk, he paused, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. He turned off the hallway light and left her undisturbed. Some people needed rest, others needed belief. Riley needed both. And now, finally, she had them.